Hey everybody, it's Mr. McKeever here, and today we're going to talk about the Glorious Revolution in England and a kind of significant power change that takes place in the British Isles. So before we begin this whole conversation, let's set up the fact that there's going to be two different sets of governments that really we're going to be comparing by the end of this period, and then really the path that these two governments take to their existence. First up, we've already talked about absolute monarchy in France and the rise of Louis XIV. The idea that a single monarch has total control over everything that's going on in his country, the lives of his citizens, nobility, etc. In England, we're going to come up with something that's very different. It's going to be a product of hundreds of years of tradition in English. It is going to be a parliamentary monarchy. It's going to be a constitutional monarchy. The country's control is going to be split over a group of elected officials in a parliament or a congress, and that is going to be shared with a monarch or ruler who kind of, runs the day-to-day aspects of things. And prior to the Glorious Revolution, our example of this is going to be Elizabeth I, and we're going to see a bit of a transition even later on as to really where the power lies. So keep this idea in your head while we kind of go through the process of what eventually happens in England and what eventually becomes the government that they create. All right, so before we jump ahead to that revolution, remember last time we were in England, we were talking about Elizabeth. Life during the reign of Elizabeth is going to be pretty fantastic. The people love her. She has a level of charisma that really drives uh, English culture. And because of that charisma, she's going to be able to really hold at bay the various religious issues that exist in the country at the time. There are four different faith groups within the British Isles. So the area is controlled by the English monarchy. You have Catholics in the country still, haven't really been removed since the time of Mary. You have the Anglican Church, which is the official religion of England. Presbyterians in Scotland, who are Calvinists, and Puritans, who are a very extreme form of Calvinism that will exist in England proper. So these four different communities are all going to have different goals, different expectations, and different desires, and Elizabeth is able to balance those basically on the love of the English people that they have for Elizabeth. But future monarchs are going to either take a different stance or really not be able to control this whole situation at all. But unfortunately, Father Time is undefeated throughout history, and eventually the great reign of Elizabeth is not going to last. Elizabeth will be remembered as one of the greatest queens in English history, probably one of the greatest queens in European history as a whole, but it doesn't mean that there weren't flaws to her reign. She accumulated a massive amount of debt during the time she ruled her country, much like the same problem that Louis XIV did for the French people. She also will spend pretty much the entirety of her 45-year reign ignoring the rule of Parliament, and this is going to be a problem for future English monarchs. And she never really resolves any of the religious problems within her country. She kind of just looks the other way. She is extraordinarily effective at handling the problems she wants to handle, and religion was not one that she really wanted to address. Lastly, her lifestyle and way that she lived her life is not going to be conducive towards a stable passing of power. Elizabeth never marries throughout her life. She doesn't have any direct heirs. So when she finally does die, England is going to be kind of grasping for straws as to who the next king or queen of England is going to be. And reality is, we all die. And on March 24, 1603, Elizabeth will die. She will be interred in the standard practices of an English monarch, and England will have to turn the corner and look for a new king. And they will find that king after a little bit of mourning, sad Putin face, and a guy named James. James the First will be the new king of England, and the irony comes from where his family is. He is actually the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, the same woman that Elizabeth had executed for plotting to have her killed. Which is a bit of a turnaround if you think about it, considering, his mother was executed by Elizabeth. And if you remember, Mary Queen of Scots was Catholic, and James is going to be raised in Scotland, where they're Calvinist, and now he is going to become the new head of the Church of England. So there's a lot of questions as to where his religious loyalties lie, But James is kind of going to avoid that issue. He never really calls into question his loyalty to the Anglican Church because that's where his political power lies, even though we're not entirely sure what he practices on his own. But, end of the day, James is not Elizabeth. The English people will accept him as king pretty early on, looking for the hopes of stability and not really having any turmoil. But those problems that Elizabeth had, James is going to have to address himself. He still has a country that's going to be divided in religion. How do you balance those four different faiths that exist in the English territories? He also has a lot of national debt. He has a parliament that is getting increasingly frustrated with the notion that the monarchy is ignoring them for now over 40 years. So James has to kind of figure out how he wants to deal with all of this. And he has a very clear mentality of what he thinks the role of a ruler is. He thinks that he should rule exclusively by himself. Remember, this is the same age and period of time as Louis XIV. Louis was a huge advocate of divine right of kings, the idea that the God chose him to rule. And James is going to be in the same mindset. He is chosen by God to rule. And therefore, if he is chosen, he probably shouldn't be sharing the power with anyone else because that would be an affront to God. So, this is a problem. English law says that he has to share rule with Parliament. Particularly, Parliament has the ability to control the money of England. They have what they call the power of the purse, the ability to tax and raise funds and call an army and those basic things that's needed to run a country. And James will need those things over the course of his life, and so will his successors later on. So he has to try to find a way to balance this, and what he does is he comes up with a clever alternative to asking Parliament for money, and it's called an imposition. When you impose upon someone, you're asking them to do something without really giving them an opportunity to say no. And in this case, an imposition is a tax on goods that are either entering or leaving the country. We would call these a tariff today, or an excise tax. And because of this, James feels like he should have the right to do it. It is the purview of the monarch to determine how England will deal with other countries. In trade to and from other countries, he believes is under his power and not under the rule of Parliament, even though it's a tax. And because of this, he kind of gets away with raising money for England without using Parliament, which is clever. It's extraordinarily well done. It's a great. Parliament is going to remember this. They're going to get increasingly more ignored.
Oh, hey!